Welcome to Legal Innovation Spotlight, the podcast that brings you the latest advancements in legal tech and knowledge management. I'm Ted Theodoropoulos, and I connect with the industry's brightest minds to provide you with valuable insights and actionable takeaways. So sit back, relax, and let's dive in. Justin, how are you this morning?
Doing well. Good morning.
Yeah, I appreciate you jumping on here with me for a few minutes.
Absolutely.
So you and I connected at TLTF. I think we were having lunch and we were talking about AI and reasoning, and you were sitting next to me and chimed in and had some really good thoughts on that topic. And I think we've covered that on previous episodes, but you and I had another conversation, and I thought you had some really good insights to share. Sounds like you dive pretty deep, which it's always good to hear perspective from folks that really jump in. But before we jump into the content here, let's just get you introduced. So you currently lead, is it Calidus Legal AI?
That's right.
Okay. And your focus on pairing AI with lawyers to enhance core legal work. You're deep in AI and ML. You're a former practicing attorney doing M&A work, which I think is interesting. Tell us more about your background and what you're doing today.
Yeah, started off practicing M&A, corporate restructuring, ended up working for AT&T after that for a while, and I led the AT&T legal transformation with our deputy GC. It was really successful and very interesting for me. The group looked at just understanding, what are our attorneys doing? What are they doing that's not the highest priority? How can they reprioritize? How can we think about bringing in-house some work that we're using outside counsel for, that we can add more efficiency to the internal resources and have them do more of the work internally? Where are we missing key insights and adding liability, and where are we over-focused where we shouldn't be? And how can we just rethink some of the workflows to where we're operating more effectively? So I did that for a bit, and then my next gig was running a data science and engineering org, and we launched the first Gen AI product for the company, the subsidiary DirecTV, which was pretty informative. It was right after ChatGPT came out. And to me, the reason I started my startup was it was so obvious, if you paired the legal transformation work with the Gen AI work, there was going to be a big opportunity. And I didn't think it was going to be something from day one that ChatGPT could just replace lawyers' jobs or anything like that. But I thought over time, this looked like a great starting block for something that could be really powerful.
Interesting. Yeah. And I remember you and I had some subsequent dialogue on LinkedIn we were talking about the Stanford paper and how, and also the Apple Intelligence paper on the GSM 8K battery of test. I think they call it GSM 8K adaptive, which GSM is grade school math. And then there were 8,000 questions that were used to evaluate how well AI performed. And Apple Intelligence did a study on that and changed the adaptive part, is where they changed minor details about the questions and to see how the models would perform. And they degraded quite a bit, anywhere from, I think at the low end, the degradation was like 30%. So at the time, maybe that was 01. I forget exactly what model on the OpenAI side was the latest and greatest, all the way down to like a 70% degradation just by inserting irrelevant facts about the questions or changing the names. And as you pointed out, that has since been resolved, and, which makes me wonder, all right, did they do that? Did they game the system at all? Like, hey, we've got a weakness here. Let's apply a Band-Aid, or was there a fundamental adaptation that they implemented that helped? But I think you had, when you ran those same questions through wherever we were at that point, maybe it was 4.0, you had different output, like it answered successfully. Am I remembering that correctly?
Yeah, I think pretty close. I think that the Apple paper, I could be wrong, but I thought they used a battery of models The only one that was somewhat advanced was GPT-4, the original GPT-4. And now we have quite a lot better models with O3 Mini and GPT 4.5. And if you look at like the benchmarks for the benchmark I like the most is Live Bench, which they hide the questions. You can't really game the system. They change the questions regularly, and they do a full battery of tests. GPT-4 scored about a 45, and the best models now score about a 76. So they've come a long way in those benchmark tests. And when you use the top models now to do the same questions that Apple had, and continue to variabilize different pieces and add irrelevant information so that you're sure that it wasn't trained on any of that information, they're answering every question correctly. And so I had sent over a handful of examples yesterday just to kind of prove my point empirically that this is testable, this is falsifiable. You can run the test yourself and see, no, the AI actually is able to solve these things. And as far as how they did it, I'm not sure all of the specifics, but I think a lot of it is on the post-training side, where they're teaching it to after they've completed the pre-training, that they're teaching the model how to be more effective with the information it does have. And then the reasoners are very good. So anything that they're able to do to add this reasoning capability, it is definitely enhancing the answers.
Yeah, and there's so much movement in the space. I can't even keep up, and I use it all the time. Like, I don't know, 5, 7, 10 times a day. But you've got Grok 3, you've got Claude 3.7, you've now got O3 Mini 4.5, apparently 5.0 or 5, GPT-5 is on the way. There's DeepSeek, there's whatever Alibaba's model is. I mean, there's Mistral, there's Llama. Like, it's impossible to keep up unless you're doing this full time, which, I'm not. And so I looked at some of the tests that you threw at O3 Mini, and I thought it did really well. I just kind of breezed through it, but why don't you kind of tell us some of the tests you threw at it and how it performed?
Yeah. Well, what I was trying to do was get a sense of how strong is the model for the types of things that people are challenging, to say AI is just not able to do these fairly simple tasks. And so I ran through a handful of examples. One being, let's find a case that was not in the training set, and let's go have it find the case text online, and then give us a full summary of like the holding and the material facts and so forth, and give us legal analysis. I think that was one. People were concerned AI is just not capable of doing that. I read it. I thought it did a fantastic job summarizing the case. I gave it some questions like solve complex numerical problems that also deal with linguistics that are hard to even understand the question being asked. It did well there. It did well on constrained poetry. It did well on I was surprised it did well on world model questions, where I basically had it run a scenario where I'm like dumping marbles out of a container and then putting super glue in and then moving them around the house and seeing, well, where'd they end up and walking through the steps. And it did pretty well on pretty much all of those things. To where my point of view is between that and GPT 4.5, now you pretty much have something that can reason like a smart human can reason, and it can help in a pretty wide variety of ways from a chat window. There's still some issues where these tools don't have full capabilities that a human would have outside of the chat window, where we can pull additional resources. But if you're resource constrained and you're just talking to somebody intelligent, it's going to be pretty similar to what these models can do now.
Yeah. And you and I kicked around the Stanford paper too, which at this point is almost a year old. It's actually over a year old from their first iteration. They did a subsequent adjustment and re-release in, I think, May of last year. But some of the challenges that the Stanford paper highlighted was, they categorized too many things as hallucinations, in my opinion. But I think overall, I got a lot of insight from reading the paper, but that AI misunderstands holdings. It has trouble distinguishing between legal actors. It has difficulty respecting the order of authority. It fabricates. Do you feel like these specific issues have gotten better?
They empirically they've gotten better. Hallucinations. There's tests on hallucination rates for the different models, and the reasoners are about half the hallucination rates of GPT-4, and GPT 4.5 is also about half the hallucination rate of GPT-4. That said, hallucinations are still an issue for these models. Legal tech companies can solve those issues, and this is where domain-specific software comes in. There's different algorithms you can run to help there. So, for example, let's say that you have an issue that you tend to hallucinate cases out of the LLMs. Well, I think everyone's kind of solved the problem now. We've been doing this for a long time, where you take the case from the LLM, you have a list out of the relevant cases, and then you have a secondary external data source that has a list of all the cases that you have API access to. And then you check the Blue Book citation to say, is this a real case or not? And then if it is, let's go check relevancy to ensure this is relevant to the answer. And if you get 2 checks, you say, okay, good. This is a real case. It's relevant. This is going to be passed on to the user, and they're going to be able to access that case. And so this is where, yeah, it's true that I think they had a good insight. LLMs will continue to hallucinate and cause problems, but LLM software that has domain-specific engineering on top of it can solve those issues. And then the other one being, hey, can LLMs actually like pull out the legal actors, and how can they figure out the holdings? That one, I think pretty well now with the top models, they're able to understand pretty well the holdings, and you can test it yourself and see whether that's true empirically yourself pretty easily. In all my tests, and we use this a lot and do a lot of evaluations, they're quite good for the top models now.
What about respecting the order of authority?
That's another one that they get. You might have to prompt engineer it a bit, and this is where the domain software comes in again. But if you prompt engineer it well, like it fully understands that the Supreme Court is superior to a state Supreme Court, or the U.S. Supreme Court versus state Supreme Court. It fully understands that court's superior to a trial court and so forth. We use this every day, and this is something that it's able to do very consistently.
So how would you assess the current state of AI capabilities in legal research and analysis as we sit today?
Yeah, I would say raw LLMs out of the box, quite bad. I wouldn't use it for legal research. And again, it's that they're going to hallucinate everything. They're going to miss some insights. They're going to have instances where, because they don't have in the pre-training data the full knowledge about all the cases and all the statute for that state, they're going to take majority rules and assume that those are right for that state, even though your state might be playing with or using a minority rule. And so there's going to be a bunch of issues, and you'll get kind of poorly formatted responses. If you ask it to draft a full brief, it'll give you like 2 pages. All of those things are problems. If you use good domain-specific software, though, these are all engineering problems that are solvable by the legal tech companies. And a lot of us have started to or very substantially solve those issues. And so if you use good software, you can expect an extensive 30-page brief, no case hallucinations, hopefully no holding hallucinations. You can expect that it's properly formatted. You can expect that it does go into the details regarding the state law that it's in question, is looking at the legal authorities to pull out the insights so that it's not just relying on majority rules. So all of those things that I think good software is able to do. That said, I would strongly suggest that we focus on software that keeps the attorney in the loop and lets the lawyer audit the output. So I wouldn't want just, hey, here's my fact pattern. I'm just going to let the AI go off and run and just draft a full 30-page brief. I don't think that's a good solution right now. I think what the AI does well is it synthesizes large amounts of information, bubbles them up to the lawyer, and probably gets it right the vast majority of the time, but the lawyer's still got to make the judgment call about which direction to go. And then the lawyer says, yes, go here, don't pursue this, and so forth. And then you work together with the AI to get a great answer very fast. And that's where I would say the focus should be.
Yeah, and I have seen, it's been a couple of months, I think it was late last year, I saw a chart of the amount of, I guess, comprehension, for lack of a better term, of different sized RAG prompts. So, and it trails off dramatically the larger, like there's some like Gemini 2 has a 1 million token context window, right, which is pretty significant. I think Claude is a couple 100,000, GPT a little lower. These are always moving, so that might not be the current state of things. Yeah. But I saw a kind of a performance metric that threw large amounts of documents through RAG at these models, and it trailed off pretty substantially in terms of missing, like key facts during summarization as that, as the number of tokens increased. And are we getting any better there, or is that still a limitation?
Getting better, it's a limitation, but it can be engineered around. This is another one. What we've had to do this where client has, say, a 40-page document, and it may be 140-page documents, and we're trying for each one to pull out all the payment terms. This is an area where out of the box LLMs do pretty poorly without a tremendous amount of prompt engineering and kind of just general engineering. So what we need to do is break down the problems to where we're only pushing through like a page at a time, maybe a little bit more than that, giving it enough context, and then giving very detailed prompts on exactly what to look for and what not to look for. You have to do all of that in a pretty domain-specific way to get good answers. And so I think if you're just using a raw LLM without a lot of engineering work, they're not going to do very well here.
And is that chunking?
Chunking is a big part of that. Yeah, you'll chunk the paper, and then run in parallel like 100 different agents basically to each have their one page to review and then summarize in groups.
Interesting. Yeah, another challenge, just as I don't consider myself an AI expert, more of an enthusiast, but I really do put AI through its paces on real world stuff mostly, and find a huge variation. I also find it quite confusing, all the fragmentation, like just within the OpenAI world, just the number. And I know 5 is supposed to solve that, but I'm still really curious how that's gonna work, because today, I mean, what do you have? 8 drop down, you know what I mean? Like 8 models you can choose from. That's a big impediment. Somebody who pays really close attention to this I still don't have a firm handle on, when to use what. It seems like a moving target.
And it's pretty tough for a casual user. You're far more knowledgeable about this than the average user. Basically the factors you need to consider are A, how fast do I need a response? B, what's the context window that I need? C, what do I need a model with a lot of pre-training data? So as in it has a lot of knowledge that I need to pull from, or do I need something more that's reasoning well? And based on those factors, you can choose the right model. But I'm in this every day, and this is my business, and so I'm familiar. For your casual user, you have no idea which one to use. And yeah, GPT-5 though will help with that, to where it's going to basically just figure out your question and then suggest the best model internally, and then just give you that best model without you need to even think about it. I think ironically, a lot of the time GPT-5 will be basically GPT-4, where they're just going to say, well, GPT-4 is good enough to answer this, go ahead and move forward. Because most questions that it gets are actually pretty easy. There's a handful of hard questions that people push on every now and then. That said, again, I would stress that the legal tech groups are a lot better for solving domain-specific tasks than these models are anyway. And what's happening is basically we're standing on top of the best models for the specific task we're working on. We're choosing the best one, knowing exactly the way that the tool that we need to use. And oftentimes we're using a combination of 2 or 3, sometimes even from different groups, to where that combination plus a lot of prompt engineering and other engineering on top of it can yield pretty good results. And I think what you'll see is in general, the legal tech companies are going to be about 2 years ahead of the raw LLMs as far as their ability to practice law, more or less, or support someone who's practicing law to be an amplifier of that person. And so in general, I don't think it's very user-friendly just to work from a chat window versus a nice template that's easy to follow, just like a web page.
Yeah. So the model selection is that has to be done algorithmically, correct? Like what is the process look like for selecting the right model? Just maybe in how you do it. I think OpenAI is somewhat opaque. I'm not sure that they provide transparency around that, but just in broad brushstrokes, like how does it determine which path to take?
Yeah, for us, what we decide, we don't do it in a full algorithm way. We have across our app probably 100, 200 different API calls. And for each one of those, we have a general view on, okay, is this going to need speed? Is it going to need the ability to instruction follow really well? Is it going to need high pre-training knowledge and so forth? And then based on those factors, we'll say it's probably one of these three models that we should use. And then we run evals in anywhere important to say, okay, let's actually see what score these models get on our evaluations. And so that could be an evaluation, for instance, of how many cases are they returning that are accurate out of where we'll try to kind of do a full analysis on, okay, here's an evaluation question. Let's have real attorneys do the work and figure out what cases you would want to cite. And then as you figured out what cases you want to cite, we're going to score these cases to say, this is like a 5, this case is a 3, this is a 1, and as far as importance. Now let's have all the models do their work and give the cases that they think are most relevant, and we're going to score those. So we have a lot of those automations in place. And then whenever a new model comes out, we just run it through the system of tests and say, okay, it's going to be good here, here, and here. It's not going to be very good here. And we can move forward that way.
Interesting. Yeah, it seems like, finding the right balance between speed and quality is the sweet spot, right? You can't slow the process down too much or you're going to impact efficiency, but you need to, it's striking that balance, it seems like, is the strategy. Is that accurate?
Yeah. And it's a fun challenge. That a lot of what we do is we'll have a 7-part workflow, for instance, and when the user does step 2, we're kicking off a pretty slow model that's really smart. And then when they get to step 6, that slow model is done with the analysis, and then it's inserting the answer for the user. Then it's done all that work in the background while they're filling out other information that's not as relevant to the answer. And so we do a lot of that. And then sometimes it's just, you just use the fast model because it's a fairly easy answer. So we'll do some of that. And it's just an interesting game of how do we think about the legal implications? How do we think about the AI-driven implications and the technology implications? And then how do we think about a good user experience and pair all that together to give something that makes sense cohesively?
Yeah. Recently I've seen interesting benchmarks. Was it Val's AI that put together? I'm not sure if you've seen it. It's just been maybe in the last week or so that I don't know if it's a benchmark or a study that talked about real scenarios, legal workflows in which and measured efficiency. Again, there's so much stuff flying at you these days. I don't have it memorized, but it seems like there's more of a focus now on legal specific use cases and how these models perform in those scenarios. Are you seeing more of that now?
I need to check out that study. I actually haven't seen it. That we love the idea of doing more legal benchmarks. That's an area where we've really taken a lot of time to try to build a tool that's useful from that perspective, and I think it's useful to the end user as well. But no, I haven't seen that specific study. I do like the idea though of pursuing that.
Yeah, it's this stuff is like March 4th, 3 days ago, is the post I saw on it. And again, it's just so hard to keep up with. And there's so much that even, after you read it, 3 more things fly at you. And it's like, so what about AI strategies in general for law firms? So, I have been critical of law firms that seem to immediately deploy tactically versus figuring out strategically what they want to do. And strategy includes a lot of different things. It can include where to first focus your AI efforts. It could include the organizational design within the firm that's going to support those efforts. It can define the risk tolerance that the firm is willing to take, because we still have, I saw an interesting study from the Legal Value Network, they do a LPM survey every year. And one question that was asked was, what percentage of your clients, so they talked to, I think, 80 law firm GCs, and what percentage of your clients either discourage or prohibit the use of AI in their matters, and the number was 42%, which seems shockingly high, because I saw another study from the Blickstein Group that it's the LDO law department. I forget what the acronym stands for. And anyway, almost 60% of the law firm client GCs that they talked to said that law firms aren't using technology enough to drive down cost. And those are two very conflicting data points. It's like, okay, you want me to drive down costs, but you got OCGs that prevent me from implementing the technology. I can't use them on your matters. Like, I don't know, do you feel like that's a disconnect in the marketplace still?
I think it's very bimodal. I think that you have a lot of attorneys on one side or the other, where some really want to embrace the newest technology all in, and others are very cautious about it. And there's not as many groups in the middle as you expect. And so it's not like your normal bell curve. And so I think that's what's going on. And I think the organizational strategy and kind of transformation lens is a really tough and interesting question for organizational leaders to think about. I think we probably disagree a little bit on this one. I have more of an engineering mindset on it, where I think the way to go is start small and iterate, and then run in parallel your strategy. We've just seen so many instances where a company really wants to get into AI, they're strategizing about it, and a year later they haven't really done anything, and they don't really get it because they have their senior leaders doing strategy stuff without being very hands-on. They don't really get it. I think if you take the time to have a small group of people that are really invested in using AI every day, try out some leading tools, go in the right direction, don't do anything just crazy, and then just don't put in any client information. Just do everything based on just very kind of random or kind of synthesized or sanitized data. I think if you do that, you can get a pretty good sense of, now I get what people are using this for. We could use it here, here, and here, but I can't use it in this area because it's going to have issues. Or this is decent software in this way, but not in this other way. Now I can make informed strategic decisions. I think that if you kind of do that pairing, that's probably what I think would be the best approach.
Yeah, well, we're aligned on part of that. So I think that striking the right risk reward balance is key, and that should be the number one driver of the approach, right? I think that jumping right in on the practice side and going whole hog with attorneys who have super high opportunity costs and low tolerance for missteps is a mistake. So we're aligned on that. I guess where I get hung up is that I'm going to quote another study here, or survey. Thomson Reuters did one. The professional services Gen AI survey came out late last year, and only 10% of law firms, 1 out of 10, have a Gen AI policy. So in order to write a policy, I think you need a strategy first, right? A policy is an outcome, is an outgrowth of a strategy, but 9 out of 10 don't have one. So what you have now is law firm users who don't have proper guidance on, hey, what can I use the public models for? Can I use them at all? Do I use it on my phone? What do I use it on my personal laptop when I'm not connected to the VPN? Like, all of those questions not being answered, I think creates unnecessary risk. Maybe at a certain, altitude, defining the strategy and incrementally working your way down more granularly, maybe that's the right balance.
I think we're in sync there. I think it's crazy that you wouldn't have a Gen AI policy at this point. I think our company at DirecTV, I think we had one 3 months in after ChatGPT. I was on the executive board there, and where we thought just immediately we have to give the company employees something to give some guidance. And yeah, I think you're exactly right. You start high, you make it a little bit overly restrictive, then you dig into the details and you realize, okay, here's where we can open up a little bit more. Here's where we can be a little bit less or more forgiving on the use of the tools, and just be smart about that. But yeah, if you're working in a law firm and you don't have a strategy, I think you definitely should start working on that right away.
Yeah. And what do you think about, this is another, opinion of mine. Some may agree, disagree, but I see a lot of law firm C-suite and director level roles, both on the innovation and AI world, that are brought in without any sort of strategy and essentially brought in to just kind of figure it out. And normally I like an agile approach, but the problem with this approach in law firms is those resources are typically not sufficiently empowered to make change. And law firm decision making is so friction heavy that it feels like you're setting these leaders up. You're not setting them up for success because the tone has to be set at the top, right? Again, around risk taking, around where they want to add value within the business, just all of these things that need to happen at the most senior level, and bringing somebody in, even if it's a C-suite, but at the director level, like, do you really think this person's going to have the political capital to make recommendations, and how long is that going to take? Like, they'll be there 3 years before anything gets, I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on the sequence?
A couple of thoughts. I think it's a tough problem for one, and the fact that you usually have a lot of partners and managing partners that are making decisions collectively. That's just inherently harder to kind of move the ship and all that. That said, I would say when we speak with most of the senior leaders at firms, I don't think they're that deep on what's possible with Gen AI, how the value of it. There's very specifics on implementation, any of that. What I'd recommend is think about the core values that you care about, like risk versus the impact to your business from an acceleration perspective, or the ability to add more insight, and all those high level values with maybe confidentiality and security and all that. And just in a very general sense, align at the highest level on what trade-offs you want to make. And then once you have that general view, then empower somebody who is very knowledgeable in the area to give very specific recommendations of, okay, given what you said from a value standpoint, here's how we can implement an end-to-end strategy around Gen AI that makes sense and is aligned with what you're guiding me on. And then I think in parallel, I would really try to have some subset of users be very engaged in using a tool and getting a good sense and getting learnings from that, and having the groups present jointly to the managing partners. I think that's probably a good recipe for success.
Yeah. And, I have advocated for bringing consultants in for that part of the journey, just because I worry that bringing in, again, a director level role to manage this is just a tougher sell than if, the executive committee brings in consultants who, and you know what, there's a gap in the marketplace right now. There's not people like you who really know this stuff are sitting in a seat like yours. There's so much capital being deployed in this area of tech that if you have these skill sets, going out and selling your time hourly is not the best way to capture economic value. It's to do something like you're doing with a startup. And as a result, I think there's a big gap in the consulting world with people who really know their stuff. So I do sympathize. Do you see that gap as well?
I think we're aligned there. It's a really tough problem for law firms because of that. And I mean, one thing you could try to do is work with a leader of a vendor and just say, hey, look, I can't use your software, but we'd love to form a longer term relationship with over time. And can you just give us some general guidance on how we can be effective? I know that person's going to be a little bit biased. It is one thing you can do. I do think that trying to find the right consultant, there are some out there. You might be able to find one, but it's tough, and you might need to just rely on finding your most tech forward partner to take a lead position and say, hey, you've got to get really deep on this stuff. And I think one thing you need to be cautious about is if you if you find someone who's not very kind of forward from a transformation perspective, they're going to move very slowly relative to somebody who's just like, hey, we need to stop everything and figure out how to do this effectively. That person's going to have enough friction thrown at them to slow them down anyway. But I would start with someone like that.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. A lot of partners still have books of business. That I don't, it's a tough problem, for sure. No easy answers. What about how should law firms think about balancing efficiency gains and the impact to the billable hour?
Yeah, this is one where we get all the time, right? Okay, maybe someday or today your software is good enough to where you're adding efficiency. I'm just going to bill less, right? So why do I even want this software? A few thoughts on that. One, in a lot of cases, attorneys aren't always billing by the billable hour. That they could be contingency, they could be in-house, that they could be doing a cost per X type of model where it's like, I'm going to charge you per demand letter I write or something like that. For those that do need to do the billable hour, which is the majority of attorneys, my view is that it's kind of like computers. That it's not like after the computer came out 10 years later, people were still spending most of their time going to law libraries and manually checking out books and reading through books. It's just not as efficient. And what will happen is that the market will all move toward AI. And then if you're the one laggard who's not using it at all, it's just going to be pretty obvious. Groups are going to know about that, and they're not going to use you because you produce less legal work than the alternative groups. And so that's where I see the market going. The other benefit is lawyers write off a lot of their time. I mean, if you work a 10-hour day, you might bill 6.5 hours on average. And a lot of that time is because you're doing background legal research work or background work to get up to speed. AI does that really well. So your goal as a law firm would probably be to have higher revenue per attorney. If attorneys are billing a higher percentage of their time, you're meeting that goal. So I think that there's a lot of talk about the billable hour, and I think it's not going away. Maybe some on the margins, maybe there's some changes. But I think that lawyers are going to want to be efficient, and over time they're going to lean on these tools. I think it's more. I think the hesitancy with AI has been more. There's a lot of traps and a lot of just, hey, this wasn't very good type of outputs, and I think that the industry is getting pretty close to where those types of issues are going away pretty fast.
Yeah. Well, what about high value use cases in on the practice side? Like I know you and I talked about document review and timeline creation, and I thought the timeline creation was an interesting one. I'm not a lawyer, and I don't know how often that scenario comes into play, but any thoughts on where the high value use cases are within the practice today?
Yeah. The areas that I think are most interesting are where AI can synthesize very large amounts of data and get a pretty much fully accurate answer almost every time. And so a couple of areas that really make sense, like you mentioned, timelines. You can ingest all of your documents that like a discovery set that's all relevant documents, throw that into the AI, say, hey, pull out all the relevant pieces and create a timeline based on that, and then use that to draft a statement of facts. That's going to be pretty good. And that's not that hard to set up to do really well. I'm been seeing a lot of users use our tool and are just like, wow, this saved a ton of time. Before I was kind of nervous about letting AI answer legal research questions, but when I see this is super useful. Very similar concept with doc review. You can automate your doc review and put in hundreds of thousands of pages of files. The AI is looking through to see whether it's relevant based on the context you give it and based on what you're asking to search for. And a very high percentage of the actually relevant files will be pulled out, prioritized, and then synthesized in a summary. Those types of tools are extremely useful where they might save thousands of hours of time to get your first pass on doc review. And I would say that the error rate is pretty similar to humans at this point, if for a well-engineered software. And there's other things that are similar, like you can do you can do kind of where you have to have an expert say, here's all of the information I relied on before I go to take the stand. And can you create the reliance list based on all of these 200 files that I uploaded to your system? and said, these are the pieces I relied on. It might take an attorney 100 hours to build that. Tool will do that with 100% precision if it's well engineered, and you've just saved that time. So those areas are the ones that I'd say are the most interesting, that I would really recommend groups try out from a good vendor. And then there's others where I think legal research is a really hard problem. It's the first one we started tackling, but just think about all the decisions that the lawyer needs to make when they do legal research. They're thinking about, okay, what kind of, is this a motion to dismiss? Is it a motion for summary judgment? Are we at trial? Am I doing the original complaint? I'm going to have very different cases that I use in all those scenarios. I've got to understand the relevancy of the cases, the procedural posture of the case. I need to think about whether in that case the court ruled for or against my client, or the person that's analogous to my client. And just so many factors. I think we're getting very close to where I feel pretty good about our analysis, but we still want the lawyer heavily in the loop through the process. But the other areas are just, AI just does it really well. It's not as complicated. And I definitely recommend you get started on those areas. And then dip your feet in some of the peripheral areas like billing, or areas where it's a little bit less related to core work too.
So like in the scenario of like creating a timeline, on the surface, to me, that doesn't sound like something that requires a point solution. Like, can the general models, or I'm not a big fan of Copilot at the moment, but do you need a specifically trained platform to do that effectively?
I think eventually the general models will be able to do it. When I don't know that any of the general models you can take like 100 different documents being uploaded at once, and if you just use even some of the better ones that instruction follow really well, that have big context windows, they're still going to miss a lot if they're not, if you don't do deeper algorithms. So for example, for us, we're kind of what I mentioned earlier, if we were to just say, Gemini, you do this pretty well, go ahead and pull out a timeline, they're going to get a lot of it right. They're going to miss a lot. If we say, Gemini, we're going to give you one page at a time. Here's the full context. Here's exactly what I want you to look for. And here's the things you might get tripped up on. Here's how to solve it. And now go pull these out. Then we're going to get really good results. And so maybe in a couple of years, the tools will be very reliable in a general sense to be able to do that. I think they're not, the raw LLMs aren't today, but we're not the only group doing timelines. Wexler does those really well. I'm sure other groups do as well.
Yeah. So you need a layer of engineering on top to manage that today. That's interesting. What about building trust with AI in the firms? There's and you know, this goes deeper than just within the firms. The clients ultimately, as you can see, with almost half still discouraging or prohibiting use, there's still a lack of trust with these tools. How do we bridge that gap?
The trust gap can come from for a few different reasons. So one, it could be a security issue. Two, it could be a confidentiality issue. And then three, it could be like an accuracy hallucination issue. So from a security standpoint, that you obviously want to make sure that the model's not training on any information that you share with it. But most of the tools are able to satisfy that requirement pretty easy. And even now, if you're using like a Pro or Plus account with ChatGPT, it's doing that as well. You still have a lot of security holes that can happen for anything in the cloud. So it's helpful to see that the group is SOC 2 compliant and has that certification. It's helpful to ensure that the group's following best practices as far as encryption, the encrypting at rest and in transit. It's a nice to have, I think, to say that you PII scrub as well. That's something you might want to look for if you're extra cautious for something particularly sensitive. And so that's helping with security and then for the most part, confidentiality as well. You might want to look for groups that set up double encryption or mutual encryption, or end-to-end encryption, where they're able to encrypt the data to where even their engineers can't see your data sets. That's possible and technically something that you can do. So anything that's extremely sensitive, you might want to ask for that. But based on if you do those two things, you should be in a pretty good position to where you're meeting those requirements. From an accuracy and hallucination standpoint, to me, the value is, or the way you solve that is keep the client in the loop. make audit trails and build things together. So if you have software that says, okay, these are the cases I used, here, click the link to see the cases, double click to say, here's the material facts I relied on, here's the quotes I relied on to generate this holding, all that stuff. If your software is able to do that, I think that it's able to really satisfy the concerns that lawyers might have of, hold on, this might not even be real. Is this something I can rely on? And you want that audit trail to be something that it's much faster to audit than to just do the work from start to finish.
Right, because that's always the rub is like, am I really being more efficient if I have to go back and double check everything? It really impacts the ROI equation when you have to do that. Well, this has been a really good conversation. I knew it would be. Just we've had some good dialogue in the past. How do before we wrap up here, how do people find out more about what you're doing at Callidus Legal?
Yeah, check us out at callidusai.com, CALLIDUSAI.com, or shoot me a message at justin@callidusai.com. And really appreciate you having me on. This was a great talk. Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Have a great weekend.
You too.
All right. Take care.
Thanks for listening to Legal Innovation Spotlight. If you found value in this chat, hit the subscribe button to be notified when we release new episodes. We'd also really appreciate it if you could take a moment to rate us and leave us a review wherever you're listening right now. Your feedback helps us provide you with top-notch content.